Number 5. Music on the Moon. In May of 1969, man had not yet set foot on the moon, and the United States and the Soviet Union were still locked in an expensive race to see who could get there first. Before the Apollo 11 mission could take Neil Armstrong to the moon's surface, where he could utter the famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," there was one more mission to complete. The crew of the Apollo 10's mission was to fly in orbit around the moon and launch its lunar module, which would go 15.6 kilometers above the moon's surface before returning to the main ship and returning to Earth. The mission was considered a dress rehearsal for the moon landing that would occur 2 months later, in July of 1969. A last chance to iron out any kinks so that there would be no surprises on the big day. But the crew was in for a surprise no one saw coming. Music from another world. While the ship was making its orbit, it made its way over to the dark side of the moon. For an hour, the astronauts would be out of contact with mission control and would have to fend for themselves. Once out of contact with Earth, they began to hear strange whistling sounds coming in on their radio that they could not explain. The noise and their reactions to it were recorded, and once they were back in contact with mission control, they filled their superiors in on the situation. Many theories were offered as to the origin of these sounds, such as magnetic fields or atmospheric interference. But these theories were debunked, as not only does the moon not have a magnetic field, its atmosphere is too thin to carry sound. This bizarre occurrence didn't interfere with the mission, and it was considered a success, which led to the Apollo 11 mission achieving the impossible and putting men on the moon. But the tale of this cosmic whistling was classified, and no one on Earth knew about the mysterious space music until decades later, when NASA's archives were declassified and made available for public access. What was this strange music? Was it simply malfunctioning equipment? Or was it a symphonic congratulations from the other species of the universe, welcoming humanity to the stars? We may never know. Number 4. The Black Knight. This next story takes us through time, from the late 1800s all the way to the late 1990s, giving more than a century of lore to this supposed satellite from an alien world. In 1899, the famous inventor and physicist Nikola Tesla was conducting experiments with radio. During one of his tests, he claimed to hear a strange transmission that he believed was coming not from Earth, but from outer space. If this is true, it means that not only is Tesla the namesake for a line of self-immolating electric cars, he is also responsible for making first contact with alien life through an orbiting alien probe that had remained undetected by humanity for thousands of years. A similar story came to light in the late 1920s, when the radio engineer Jörgen Hulse also claimed to have picked up a strange transmission that had echoed back to him after a delay. These long-delayed echoes, as they were later named, still do not have an official explanation, but many theorize that they originate from the same supposed satellite as the ones detected by Tesla years before. Similar stories began to crop up from multiple sources, including a science fiction author by the name of Duncan Lunin, who claimed to have decoded messages from the Black Knight satellite, which had revealed the existence of an alien race in the Epsilon Boötis, a binary star system in the Boötis constellation. In 1954, a UFO researcher claimed that the United States Air Force had reported that they had evidence of 2 satellites orbiting the Earth, an unusual claim since no country had yet come up with the technology necessary to launch a satellite. In 1963, an astronaut named Gordon Cooper reportedly called in a UFO sighting while making his 15th orbit during the Mercury Atlas 9 space mission. However, this incident is notably missing from the official NASA mission log. The seemingly biggest boon of evidence came to light in 1998 during the STS-88 mission to the still under construction International Space Station, where the first US module was delivered to the ISS, making it an important mission in the history of space exploration. During the construction, one of the astronauts saw something unusual floating above the Earth and managed to snap a picture of it. This photo was latched onto by believers in the Black Knight satellite as proof of its existence. But as they often do, NASA decided to be no fun at all and crap in everyone's oatmeal. NASA claimed that the photo most likely showed simple debris. Space journalist James Oberg, a man with possibly the coolest sounding job title ever, theorized that it was a thermal blanket that had been confirmed lost by the mission that had made its way into the atmosphere and gotten tangled up into a strange shape before eventually burning up. Is there a satellite of alien origin orbiting the Earth that NASA doesn't want us to know about? Or are all these stories merely a combination of technical issues and enthusiastic theorists? Perhaps this is something to debate in the comments below. Number 3. The Brookings Report. In the year 1960, NASA's Committee on Long-Range Studies partnered with the Brookings Institute to create a report for the House Committee on Science and Astronautics titled Proposed Studies on the Implications of Peaceful Space Activities for Human Affairs. Not surprisingly, when talked about in general conversations between UFO and alien believers, it is referred to instead as the Brookings Report. This section theorizes about how the public would react to the discovery of alien life and how it would affect society, and how the decision would have to be made on whether or not such a discovery would be made public. Some choice passages are as follows. Anthropological files contain many examples of societies, sure of their place in the universe, which have disintegrated when they have had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies, espousing different ideas in different lifeways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behaviors. Studies might help to provide programs for meeting and adjusting to the implications of such a discovery. Questions one might wish to answer by such studies would include: how might such information, under what circumstances, be presented to or withheld from the public, for what ends? What might be the role of the discovering scientists and other decision makers regarding the release of the fact of discovery? While it is important to note that the report does not state whether the government should or should not cover up the existence of alien life, should it be discovered, it does state that this is a choice that would have to be made. This report was developed relatively early in the history of space exploration and was presented to policymakers, so we do know that people in charge of government policy were presented with a document that floated the idea of hiding the discovery of alien life from the people of Earth. I don't think the writers of the report were trying to hide anything, but the fact that a report featuring a section on what courses of action should be taken if, hypothetically, alien life were discovered, makes me wonder if this was actually just a way to get the answers they needed without revealing the true implications of the report to the writers. Number 2. Why is NASA altering photos? NASA has a program called Picture of the Day where, predictably, they post a photo from their various rovers and satellites onto the internet every day for public consumption. One day in late 2014, the photo they posted was a picture taken by NASA's Cassini orbiter of Saturn's moons, Dione and Titan. It is a stunning photograph, but one internet commenter found something he did not expect when he downloaded and adjusted the photo. While adjusting the contrast and brightness of the photo, he found that it revealed a huge object behind one of the moons that was giving off a rainbow-like aura. Even more disturbing, he saw the photo had been altered with black markings covering whatever it was behind the moon, proving that NASA had altered the photo before posting it. He took his claims online where they started receiving some attention, but before long he received a comment from someone he was not expecting. The person who had edited the original photo. A NASA employee who explained that the photo was not edited to try and hide any alien craft, but to make up for the technical limitations of the Cassini orbiter as it photographed the two moons. As she explained it, Cassini takes color photos by snapping 3 sequential photos through red, green, and blue filters. In the time that separated the 3 frames, Dione moved, so if I did a simple color composite, I would be able to make Titan look right, but not Dione, or Dione look right, but not Titan. So, I aligned Dione, cut it out, then aligned Titan, and then had to account for the missing bits of shadow where the bits of Dione had been in the 2 of the 3 channels. While this does seem to be a plausible explanation as to why the photo was edited, the original poster remained skeptical. He believed it was possible that NASA had ordered the photo altered before posting it, and then released the explanation once they were caught. Of course, one could argue that if NASA had taken a photo that featured a UFO, and they didn't want the public to know about it, they could have just not posted the photo at all, rather than trying to Photoshop it out and hoping that no one noticed. Number 1. What is NASA hiding at the North Pole? In 2016, a researcher came forward claiming to have proof that NASA was trying to cover up something at the North Pole. He provided older satellite images that seemed to show some kind of crater or hole at the top of the Earth. He believed that this was evidence that supported the hollow Earth theory. The hollow Earth theory claims that underneath the surface of the Earth is more land, as well as a central sun located in the center of the Earth. The claimant says that these photos of a hole at the top of the Earth, first seen in satellite photos from 1968, may not be definitive proof that the Earth is hollow, but the hole's omission from subsequent satellite photos does prove that there is some kind of entrance at the pole that NASA is trying to hide. Many explorers have tried to reach this area hoping to prove the theory's validity, but many of them did not survive the journey, and those who did came back with stories that simply cannot be taken seriously. One group claimed that the hole was real, and that once they managed to lower themselves into it, inhabited by a small race of creatures. The explorers kept their distance but reported seeing some kind of factory in the distance that seemed to be running all throughout the day and night. Stranger still were the emissions being generated by the factory, as whatever was fueling it was giving off a smell not dissimilar to ginger. Not wanting to push their luck, the explorers took photos and came back the way they came, but when they checked their cameras, they found that some kind of magnetic interference from the pole had wiped their camera's memory cards. They came forward with these claims, and NASA firmly denied that their claims had any validity, saying that the explorers were simply mad or looking for attention. However, another government agency, NORAD, has been more forthcoming about what is happening at the North Pole, and released a report stating that it is a consistent site of UFO activity. Every year around the winter solstice, they've reported a small flying craft exiting the North Pole and traveling around the world at super speeds, seeming to visit every country on Earth in just one night, before returning to the pole and not being seen again until the next year. What is this strange craft? Is it traveling around the Earth in order to spy on its people? Is it friend or foe? What is the purpose of the bright red light shining at the head of the craft? Is it connected to the explorers' stories? And if so, why has NASA not come forward to us with information? Number 5. Aliens on the Sun? In December 1995, the joint NASA-ESA Solar and Heliospheric Observatory Mission, or SOHO for short, was launched in an effort to study the Sun so that we could learn more about it. SOHO has allowed us to study the Sun inside out, helping us to learn about its internal structure, its extensive outer atmosphere, and the powerful solar winds that blow across our solar system. SOHO was integral in proving once and for all that the Sun does not in fact wear a giant pair of sunglasses, as has been implied by several children's art projects. SOHO captures images across several different spectrums of light, most of which are then made available for public consumption on the internet. Most of these images are pretty innocuous, but sometimes, someone will see something that can't be explained, proving that sometimes staring at the Sun can be beneficial. A UFO enthusiast was looking at the photos of the Sun and noticed a black square of the photo cut out. At first, he thought it was a technical issue, until he looked into it more. Here's the story as he related it. On June 28th, I found what looked like a mistake in the photo, but looks more like a black cube that is in orbit around our Sun. Sure, one photo mistake, right? Wrong. NASA and SOHO have the most advanced telescopic equipment available. For a cube to be missing from the photo, either it was cut out by NASA to hide something, or is it a flying cube in orbit around the Sun? Crazy? I think not. How often do you look directly at the Sun? Never, because it will damage your eyes. So it would go unnoticed. However, scientists around the world have stated there are UFOs orbiting the Sun many times larger than the Earth. I have recorded 3 instances of this cube flying around in different positions this month. For a long time, it was assumed that these squares were simply a computer glitch, but 4 years later, the squares showed up in a photo again. But the idea that this was a technical issue was called into question when separate UFO enthusiasts came forward with photos from a different SOHO camera that showed the square in the same spot. Is there a cube-shaped UFO orbiting the Sun? Or is NASA editing out something from the photos before releasing them? If there is something there, what are they trying to accomplish by hiding it? Number 4. Neil Armstrong's alien encounter. On July 20th, 1969, history was made as the Apollo 11 lunar module landed on the moon, allowing its crew members, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, to become the first humans to ever walk on the moon. It was a landmark day for humanity, and Neil's first steps on the moon were broadcast on television, where it was witnessed by over 650 million viewers. During his moonwalk, he had access to 2 radio channels. One that would let everything he said be broadcast both to television and mission control, and another that would allow him to speak only to mission control. At some point in the moonwalk, Armstrong switched over to his private channel. When asked in later years why he had switched to his private channel and what was said, Armstrong said, "I have no comment on that, and am uncomfortable discussing the topic in any further detail." During the time that the radio communication was unavailable to the public, several amateur ham radio enthusiasts managed to tune in to the private channel. The following quotes from the incident have been corroborated by hundreds of unrelated operators who were all tuned in at the time. "I say that there were other spaceships. Those are giant things. No, 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 this is not an optical illusion. No one is going to believe this. They're here, under the surface. We saw some visitors. They were here for a while, observing the instruments. I say that there were other spaceships. They're lined up in the other side of the crater. My hands are shaking so badly, I can't do anything. Film it. God, if these cameras have picked up anything, what then? I didn't have any film at hand. 3 shots of the saucers, or whatever they were, that were ruining the film. They've landed here. There they are, and they're watching us." In the years since, this was denied by Armstrong and NASA, but Buzz Aldrin did say there was at one point an unknown object tracing their path to the moon. Were some of the over 650 million beings watching the moon landing visitors from another world? We may never know for sure. Number 3. NASA cutting the live feed. Another of NASA's crown jewels is the International Space Station, which, as the name suggests, was built with the collaboration of other countries in an effort to collect data and therefore raise our understanding of the universe and our place in it. The International Space Station broadcasts a live stream that anyone on the internet can watch. But sometimes the feed is lost. Sometimes this feed going down feels somewhat convenient. On July 9th, 2016, the live feed showed a bright glowing object falling into view of the camera. Just as the object is about to get into a more viewable position, the feed dropped, and a message came on screen claiming that technical issues had caused the feed to cut out. One YouTuber grabbed the footage and uploaded it. In the caption of the video, he states that it wasn't necessarily an alien craft and very well could have been a meteor, but the fact that the feed was cut just before the camera could broadcast a clear look was inherently suspicious. A spokesperson for NASA came forward, saying the feed being cut was not a deliberate act, explaining that the station regularly passes out of range of the tracking and data relay satellites used to send and receive video, and telemetry from the station. For video, whenever we lose signal, the cameras will show a blue screen or a preset video slate. This explanation, of course, did little to appease the people of the internet, who had already decided that the feed was cut in an intentional effort to prevent the regular people of Earth from learning about visitors from another planet. But as far as explanations from government agency goes, this is one of the better ones I've heard. Number 2. The MJ-12 documents. When John F. Kennedy was made President of the United States in 1960, he quickly developed a reputation of not being a fan of the intelligence community. He believed that certain information should be shared with the people they were governing, and perhaps even more surprisingly, felt that some information should be shared with their Soviet counterparts in the interest of developing a relationship and de-escalating the Cold War in the aftermath of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He apparently drafted and sent a memorandum in 1963, 2 weeks before his death, that requested that NASA initiate broader cooperation with the USSR in their outer space and lunar landing programs. Part of this document says that NASA would have to share classified UFO secrets with the Soviets. It has been claimed that the idea of sharing this information with an enemy state was the last straw for the intelligence community, all of whom apparently formed together to pool information and plans in a group called the Majestic 12, which was supposedly formed by President Truman in 1947 to deal with UFO activity. In documents that had apparently been saved from a fire known as the MJ-12 documents, it is stated that Kennedy has been making inquiries about the Majestic 12's activities that cannot be allowed. The document goes on to talk about how the issue should be handled, saying that when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, and it should be wet. Well, for a layman, this is more confusing than anything. It may be clear when you consider that wet work is a euphemism for assassination. It should of course be noted that official government agencies claim that these documents are forgeries, but it's not like an intelligence agency partially responsible for the death of a president is going to verify documents that supposedly implicate that same government agency. Was President Kennedy killed for trying to force NASA to share information of UFOs with the Soviet Union? If these documents are authentic, it would certainly seem to be the case. Number 1. The Apollo 8 confirmation. The original goal of the 1968 Apollo 8 mission was to be the first craft to leave low orbit and fly in an elliptical medium Earth orbit. JFK had challenged NASA to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and that deadline was fast approaching. So, in order to make the most of their opportunities, NASA made a bold call and decided that rather than settling for medium Earth orbit, they would instead quite literally shoot for the moon, which they would then orbit before returning home. Apollo 8 launched on December 21st, 1968, and reached the moon on Christmas Eve. Millions watched as astronauts Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders made their orbit of the moon. Despite NASA having a reputation for planning everything down to the minutiae, the plans for this broadcast were surprisingly loose. As Borman recalled, "We were told that on Christmas Eve we would have the largest audience that had ever listened to a human voice, and the only instructions that we got from NASA was to do something appropriate." The astronauts chose to take turns reading from the book of Genesis while their craft made 10 orbits around the moon. As Lovell later said, "The first 10 verses of Genesis is the foundation of many of the world's religions, not just the Christian religion. There are more people in other religions than the Christian religion around the world, and so this would be appropriate to that, and that's how it came to pass." With the more sentimental aspects of the broadcast complete and their mission a success, it was time for the astronauts to come home. Mission Control waited anxiously as Christmas Eve turned into Christmas Day to find out if the engine burn for the craft to leave their lunar orbit had worked. Word soon came from Jim Lovell confirming not only that the ship was on its way home, but something else as well. Lovell's radio communication stated, "Roger, please be informed there is a Santa Claus." In all the hubbub concerning the first lunar orbit, this news seemed almost like an afterthought. But the fact that a NASA astronaut confirmed that not only is Santa real, but that he lives on the moon is astounding. NASA never followed up on this information publicly, but what else have they learned since then? Are the legendary elves really moon people? Is the workshop located on the dark side of the moon? This is yet another example of NASA giving us bites of information that raise more questions than they answer.
Number 5. Well, first and foremost, if you were looking for any proof that the government definitely knows more about aliens than they let on, how about from the mouth of the 3-letter organizations themselves? The CIA released a tweet in 2014, wow, obviously was meant to be taken in a joking manner, but still pretty illuminating, saying that throughout the 50s and 60s, they estimate that 50% of all sightings of unexplained aerial phenomena and UFOs were simply the CIA testing new aircraft. Out of context, the CIA admits they were behind 50% of all UFO sightings is an extremely attention-grabbing headline, and probably what I should have named this video. Would have got you to click better. And it is an attention-grabbing headline. At the time they were testing the Lockheed U-2 spy plane, codenamed Dragon Lady, which was able to fly at altitudes thought unreachable by a one-manned aircraft at the time. We know the CIA will always be a little bit more technologically advanced than they're willing to let on. That's just the nature of shadowy governments. But the conspiracy theorist in me has to wonder, is it even just the littlest bit possible that them releasing this could be a misinformation campaign? I mean, this is just what they're willing to admit, right? Who's to say what they won't admit? What if they put stuff like this out there so the next time you see something odd in the sky, you just dismiss it thinking, oh, that's just the CIA testing airplanes, instead of the more logical, reasonable answer that it's an alien spacecraft observing you from up above? And what if all I'm saying is just wild speculating and tinfoil hat level conspiracies because I'm trying to get views on video? It's more likely than you think. But them admitting they're responsible for most UFO sightings intones to me that they're aware of a lot more UFO sightings that are reported. Makes you wonder how much they research them all. Do you think they look at every blurry cell phone camera video posted to Reddit, or just the really serious ones that make the news? I'm hoping to get some answers someday, and I have a feeling that some of those answers are in this video. It won't all be wild speculation, I promise. And hey, if you want to see more alien stuff, click through. We've got boxes full of declassified documents, NASA stories, and videos that are just out of this world. Get it? So stay subscribed and stay scared, and I'll see you there. Number 4, the Guy Hoddle memo. So it's a pretty much an open book secret that the 3-letter agencies have known about aliens in some way or another since they've started writing things down. They don't hide it or pretend to hide it anymore, which is nice. They finally admitted that Area 51 even exists for the first time a couple years ago, so we could all use a little openness in our day-to-day. Let's take a look at one of the FBI's most talked about and most viewed documents, the Guy Hoddle memo. And despite being one of the most seen FBI memos, it's but a single-page document that was never followed up on. Well, it sounds like we should follow up on it. Guy Hoddle was the head of the FBI field office in Washington, and his report was addressed to the head of the FBI, one J. Edgar Hoover. The contents of the report were simple, but shocking. It detailed the descriptive encounter of an agent making a physical sighting of what they believed to be a UFO. It's dated 3 years after the Roswell incident, but it was reported in New Mexico for what it's worth. Here's a quote from the memo. The saucers were described as being circular in shape with raised centers, approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. Now, if you ask me, that is almost too perfect, isn't it? I mean, the memo lines up nearly perfectly with the stereotypical, cartoon description of aliens being little gray or green men flying around in flying saucers around New Mexico. The memo goes on to read that the agent claims they had found the saucers because an FBI high-powered radar in the area had detected it, and this radar detecting it had interfered with the controlling mechanism of the crafts. But despite all of this, which really seems like it's the paper trail screaming, proving, hey, aliens are out there, you should go check them out, the memo ends by saying no further evaluation was attempted, and the Hoddle memo was never followed up on, presumably crumpled up and thrown away. Director Hoover, I guess, thought it wasn't worth his time and disregarded it, leaving it now as nothing more than an incredibly odd piece of history. Number 3, Project Blue Book. Well, here's the thing. Even if Director Hoover at the FBI didn't see fit to look into the Hoddle memo, there were definitely other organizations that were looking into UFOs. Maybe it's not just the FBI, but I can tell you that the Air Force sure was. If you're an experienced UFO enthusiast, perhaps you're already very familiar with Project Blue Book, but if you're not, hey, let's talk about it. The project was officially started in 1952 and terminated in 1969. And the project had 2 main goals. 1. Confirm if UFOs were a threat to national security. And 2. Scientifically analyze any UFO-related data. Well, that seems like pretty strong evidence to me. Not that the project existed to see if UFOs are real, but rather to determine if they were a threat. That seems like they're writing and admitting no, we know, we just want to know if they're scary. And is that not the most human sentiment you've ever heard? If you guys learned nothing from Avatar, we gotta be making friends with aliens, not being afraid of them. In the years of Project Blue Book's operations, a stunning 12,618 reports were filed and collected. And those are just the ones that are officially recorded. Of those, interestingly, there were an individual 700 reports that were found to be unexplainable after research and intense analysis. Isn't that interesting? Now, a great number of these reports turned out to be the U-2 spy plane that we mentioned all the way back in point number 5, if you remember that far away. But that still leaves 700 completely unexplained sightings of aircraft that the USAF looked into and could not find answers for. The project was ultimately shut down in 1969, with the official explanation being given that, number 1, no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force has ever given any indication of threat to our national security. And number 2, there has been no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represent technological developments or principles beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. And number 3, there has been no evidence indicating the sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. Oh, well that sounds like kind of a bit of a bummer, doesn't it? They went through thousands of documents and declared that none of it was worthwhile evidence to suggest that aliens exist. Well, it's a shame that we're never going to mention any more things of the Air Force on this video, or any more things about pilots encountering aliens. I mean, that really blows. I mean, except for our next point. Take a listen. Number 2, the UAP report. Very Very recently, the Pentagon declassified a series of documents known internally as the UAP report, and it was basically the sequel to Project Blue Book, the streaming follow-up. And yeah, every single time we have an alien video, I'm probably going to have a little meltdown where I talk about how last year the government confirmed that they researched UFOs and that's what they spend your money on, and no one seemed to care about this, they just slipped it under the rug. I guess we were kind of busy with other stuff, but still, what happened to our curious minds, people? We learned that the various three-letter agencies in the States had been researching, analyzing, and scouting out sightings of UFOs, mostly because pilots just could not stop reporting them during training ops. One pilot, Lieutenant Ryan Graves, claims that he saw hundreds, maybe thousands in his career as a Navy pilot. One of the more famous ones is the Tic Tac sighting, referring to a massive oval-shaped aircraft that was spotted by two pilots. This one comes from 2004, and the two veteran pilots, Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slate, were the ones who called it in. Two respected, trustworthy Navy veterans. Their report reads that the objects were spotted almost out of nowhere, some 80,000 feet in the air, which would then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, then stop at around 2,000 feet and hover in place. Very normal airplane behavior. They would drop out of radar range or shoot directly up into the sky on a 90-degree angle. For weeks, Navy crew was watching these objects trying to determine just what they were. They certainly weren't American in origin, and they weren't recognized by any other organizations. To confirm what they'd seen, Slate and Fravor were sent off on a reconnaissance mission to get eyes on it. What they found was more confusing than either of the two men could ever have imagined. They reported back that the object they were seeing was like a giant Tic Tac, white-colored, oval-shaped, and 40 feet long. Far too big to be a drone, and it didn't maneuver in a way like an aircraft would, making erratic movements, staying out of reach of radars, as if it knew it was trying to stay undetected. The pilots flew towards a rendezvous point to touch down, and presumably cracked their windows open and asked each other, hey, what the hell was that? But as they flew towards the LZ, the UAP flew past them at a breakneck speed and then disappeared entirely. When questioned about it, Fravor said that it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen in his life. I mean, that guy flew planes like every day for years, so he probably knows a thing or two. Number 1, non-terrestrial officers. Now, if you're like me, you're probably frustrated that you know the truth is so close within grasp behind closed doors. To know in your heart of hearts that there are answers to the unexplained just out of sight would drive you to do something crazy. Now, for most of us, all we can do is sit and speculate and maybe watch some lovely top 5 videos of a very handsome host talking about aliens. But for one Gary McKinnon, a Scottish computer programmer, he decided that wasn't enough and decided to take matters into his own hands. McKinnon was a genius computer hacker and had his sights set on the biggest prize he could imagine, going after NASA's servers to see if they had any hidden alien data just waiting to be found, in what was described as the biggest military hack of all time. Quite the conversation starter. Why would anyone risk their career, freedom, and livelihood on this? Well, Gary wanted the truth and he would do anything to get it. McKinnon claims he had insider knowledge that confirmed the US had suppressed anti-gravity technology reverse engineered from UFOs and free energy. In his own statement, McKinnon said, "This should not be kept hidden from the public when pensioners can't even pay their fuel bills." Yeah. Well, so what did McKinnon find? Well, he didn't find proof of the reverse-engineered UFOs that he'd been hoping for, but he found quite a lot that was remarkably illuminating. First up, a 400-page document called the Disclosure Project, outlining testimonials from government agents across multiple branches of service, reporting all their sightings and scientific analysis on unexplained flying objects. That would already be pretty impressive, but on top of that, McKinnon also managed to find a document entitled Non-Terrestrial Officers. Non-terrestrial officers? What? What? Is that just fancy talk for astronaut? Well, the document was a spreadsheet listing the names of NASA officers and employees who were to be transferred to new ships or to serve on board space stations. But here's where it gets weird. McKinnon noted that the names of these vessels listed did not appear to exist in any other database. And if that wasn't enough, McKinnon claims in his searching he saw images of aircraft that did not resemble anything he had ever seen. One in particular he describes as looking like a massive cigar-shaped craft floating over the northern hemisphere that did not look man-made. One wonders if that's the same as the Tic Tac ship. He said he was in a shock looking at the image and didn't think to take a photo. Now, after pulling off an unbelievable fast one on NASA, McKinnon couldn't resist a bit of cheeky cyber vandalism and edited NASA's website homepage with a bit of text that read, "Your security is crap, by the way." Now, I'm not endorsing hacking a government website, but that's one of the coolest things I've ever read. Now, I don't know how much you know about the United States government. Boy, do they just love it when you prove to them that they have a massive security breach in their most classified data. Presumably the only thing that that kept McKinnon from being strapped to a car battery and thrown into a black van by the men in black was the fact that he lived in Scotland and was kind of hard to get a hold of. He was arrested by UK police, and the United States government tried their absolute hardest to have him extradited to the States to be tried for the fullest extent of his crimes. Honestly, I bet it was the note. I bet that's what really pushed them over the edge. McKinnon managed to avoid extradition and was protected by the Crown for serving out what would have been a 70-year sentence. But presumably he's not planning any road trips to the States anytime soon, and I'm sure NASA has improved their security just a little bit. Number 5. Getting in is impossible. Area 51 didn't get a reputation as one of the most secretive places in America because it was easy to get into. And there's a reason our best idea for getting a peek inside was to just swarm the place en masse and hope that there'd be too many of us to stop. The thing is, they saw that coming. Mostly because we broadcasted it and made Facebook groups about it and it was a big meme, but as well, the entire surrounding area around Area 51 is completely surveyed. Armed soldiers patrol the perimeter at all times, and they watch the airspace up above, so no dropping in Fortnite style either. Up until 2018, you couldn't even get a good look at it from satellite imagery since it was censored on Google Earth. Now, some conspiracists say there's cameras hidden in the surrounding countryside in the rocks, and I honestly believe that. They keep an eye on everything that goes on the main road. You want to know how seriously they take security at Area 51? Those employed at Area 51 fly in from McCarran International, as there's no commuter traffic allowed. I'm guessing all the parking spaces are taken up by UFO parking. Employees fly in from a secret airline called Janet Airlines, an acronym which funnily enough stands for just another non-existent terminal. Janet may be America's most secretive airline. Anyone working it needs top level clearance. That's everybody working it. Even the flight attendants need to be cleared for top level clearance. Just in case they overhear a man in black suits talking about the Type 25 plasma pistol they recovered off the crash site of the Kig-Yar Scout they found just outside of Roswell, they know not to report that to anybody. Now, no word on whether or not Janet Airlines contributes to air miles, but I have to imagine their frequent flyer reward program is pretty impressive.
Number 4. Employees are paid in cash. In 2010, some of the secrets about Area 51 were declassified, and former employees were able to talk about their time at the secretive military base. One of these former employees, a 72-year-old named James Nose, gave an interview about his time at Area 51 to the Seattle Times. James claimed not to have seen any UFOs or aliens, but hey, maybe that just wasn't declassified material he could talk about. The interview contains some interesting anecdotes about some US government covert ops, but what I find most interesting about the interview is his claim that several of the employees were paid in cash. He would be paid in cash, and as a result, there was no paperwork connecting him to Area 51, which is probably why my landlord also insists on being paid in cash. Other employees claimed that when they were paid by check, the checks would be from unrelated non-government companies such as Pan American. So although we don't know for sure what is being done at Area 51, we know that it is so secretive that they don't even want a record of who has worked for them.
Number 3, they're expanding. The most secret building in the world is getting bigger, slowly but surely each year, and no one on the outside knows why. And they're doing it the way they do everything, which is to say clandestinely and not telling nobody nothing. They've been expanding the area surrounding the base, buying up swaths of land to assimilate inside of it. From what can be observed, new hangars and new runways are being built, but again, it's impossible to ascertain what for because everything revolving around this building is top level clearance, so we only have wild mass guessing to go on. Obviously they're building more hangars because they're collecting more UFOs. I mean, what else could it really be? I'm a guy on a YouTube channel, I'm a trusted news source. They hit a bed of a snag in 2015 when the mass of land they were swallowing up was owned by a family who'd held the land for the past century. They refused their offers to give it up, and the Air Force offered the family $5.9 million. But the family wanted to hold out for more, as they felt it wasn't a good enough offer. And honestly, it's the US Air Force. We know they've got the money. Spring a little for it. It's not the first time the secretive base has grown. When it was first established in 1955, it was a little over 6 by 10 miles. But these days, the base has become so large, it's now 4,500 square miles across. Area 51 is getting big enough to be its own state. It's bigger than Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Delaware, the 3 best states. I can't tell you what they're doing or what they need all that space for, but it does keep me awake wondering.
Number 2, there's a presidential declaration exempting them from turning over classified materials. In the United States, an organization can be forced to disclose classified information for a variety of reasons. As an example, if the Environmental Protection Agency believes that an organization is disposing of toxic waste in a way that goes against local hazardous laws, they can order that organization to turn over relevant materials, classified or not, in order to aid in the EPA's investigation. On September 29, 1995, President Bill Clinton signed a presidential determination exempting Area 51 from these laws. As Clinton stated in his determination, "I find that it is in the paramount interest of the United States to exempt the United States Air Force's operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada, from any applicable requirement for the disclosure to unauthorized persons of classified information concerning that operating location. Therefore, pursuant to 42 U.S.C., I hereby exempt the Air Force's operating location near Groom Lake, Nevada from any federal, state, interstate, or local provision respecting control and abatement of solid waste or hazardous waste disposal that would require the disclosure of classified information concerning that operating location to any unauthorized person." This determination has to be renewed by the president every year, and we know for a fact that the next president, George W. Bush, chose to uphold and renew it, making this a rare example of bipartisanship.
They cover up a lot. Now look, this whole video we've been talking about everything they cover up, but it goes so much deeper than you know. You might think working at Area 51 would be your way into learning all the secrets the base has to offer. You know, pick up a broom, sweep something up, learn about the aliens. But you might be saddened to know even those with top-level clearance are still kept in the dark on just about everything. In the 90s, there was a bit of a controversy when several lower-level Area 51 workers tried to file a suit against Area 51. Because exposure to the black site's hazardous materials was making them sick. Apparently, the base would have stacks of discarded equipment, scraps, and hazardous waste left around in open trenches the size of football fields, and then to dispose of them, workers would cover them in jet fuel and light it on fire, leading to toxic smoke blowing all throughout the base. Definitely sounds very safe. This smog was affectionately nicknamed London Fog by the workers in between bouts of coughing fits. Several workers came down with skin conditions or respiratory conditions from their time working the black site. But where things get curious is that they don't even know what was being burned around them. And when the workers tried to file their lawsuit, the base refused to clarify or even acknowledge what had been burned. In fact, the government outright refused to even acknowledge the name of the base, as up until 2013, they still pretended the thing didn't exist at all and were very careful in all official documentation to avoid saying the name of it ever. Did you know it wasn't even until 2013 that the base was ever officially acknowledged by a president? It was President Obama, and he was doing so in a bit of a jokey manner too. The government only acknowledged the workers after their lawyer had provided them with satellite photos of the base acquired from a dubious source. Whatever was being burned there was pretty serious stuff. I mean, we can only speculate. Plasma recovered from a Type 52 troop carrier? Ectoplasm? Unobtainium? We may never know. And that's what makes me want to know.